December 19th, 1944, Ardennes Forest, Belgium. Inside the frozen belly of a Sherman M4, Corporal James O'Malley pressed his headset tight against his ears. His breath fogged against the steel walls as distant artillery rumbled. Then, through the hiss of static, a sharp voice crackled. "Pivot left, grid 46B, move now!" Within seconds his unit shifted course, weaving through the snow-laden pines as if guided by an unseen hand. Outside, German grenadiers believed the fog had blinded the Americans. They thought artillery spotters and tanks alike were deaf and mute in the mist. But the Shermans moved in eerie unison, striking with uncanny timing. What the Germans never realized was that nearly every American tank carried something they lacked: a radio net linking crews, commanders, and artillery in real time. For German troops, this invisible advantage was almost incomprehensible. And by the time they understood, it was already too late. By 1944, the US Army had standardized radios across its tank forces. Nearly every Sherman carried the SCR 508 or SCR 528 set, operating on 20 to 27 MHz with a range of 5 to 10 miles. Each unit could communicate platoon orders instantly, directing maneuvers with a clarity Germans had never seen. In contrast, German doctrine equipped radios mainly in command tanks, leaving the majority of panzers reliant on hand signals or messengers. According to captured Wehrmacht communications logs, only 30 to 40% of their tanks operated with functional radios at mid-war. That gap was devastating in fluid battles. One German officer later admitted, "The enemy tanks seemed to move as if one mind controlled them." Radios turned American armor into a living network, multiplying the effect of even modest firepower. The Germans thought superior guns and thicker armor were decisive. They were about to learn otherwise. The Germans believed their edge lay in machines like the Panther and Tiger. The Panther's high-velocity 75mm KWK 42 gun could penetrate Sherman armor at over 1,500 meters. The Tiger I's 100mm frontal plate made it nearly impervious at long range. German crews trusted their Zeiss optics, fine-tuned transmissions, and battlefield experience. Yet, doctrine assigned radios primarily to platoon leaders. A Panther without a radio relied on visual signals, flags, or even shouted commands in the chaos of battle. During clashes in Normandy in 1944, reports from Panzer Lehr Division reveal multiple engagements lost because subordinate tanks failed to receive orders under fire. While German armor dazzled in design, it stumbled in coordination. That overconfidence in steel blinded commanders to the invisible threads holding Allied armor together, and those threads, woven by radio signals, would prove harder to break than even the thickest armor plate. Back home, the American industrial engine turned doctrine into reality. At the Detroit Arsenal and Fisher body plants, over 1,000 Sherman tanks rolled off assembly lines each month in 1943. Everyone came pre-fitted with an SCR 508 weighing 45 pounds, installed in under an hour. The cost per set was just $185, insignificant compared to the $33,000 price tag of the tank itself. Workers mounted radios alongside turrets before tanks left the factory floor, ensuring no Sherman entered combat mute. The scale was staggering. More than 50,000 Shermans carried radios into Europe and the Pacific. One factory foreman later joked they were radios on tracks with guns attached. For US tankers, this meant hearing not only their platoon leader but also artillery observers, infantry calls, and higher command, a battlefield that hummed with voices instead of silence. But with every signal came a risk: interception by the enemy. American commanders worried constantly about German interception. The SCR 508 and 528 sets used amplitude modulation, and German signals intelligence units, Funkaufklärung, had the ability to listen in. Declassified OSS memos reveal fears that the enemy could anticipate maneuvers. To counter this, US forces developed brevity codes, short bursts, coded grids, and rapid frequency changes. The key advantage wasn't secrecy, but speed. German operators might hear, but by the time they deciphered, the Shermans had already moved. One captured officer admitted, "We heard their voices, but they were already gone." The psychological weight was heavy. To German troops, it seemed as though Americans anticipated their every move. In reality, it was simply disciplined comms drilled at Fort Knox and other training grounds. For German crews, silence became suffocating. For American tankers, voices over the net turned fear into action. And in one battle, radios would prove decisive. September 1944, Lorraine, France. Colonel Bruce Clark's 4th Armoured Division faced a German counterattack of over 200 Panthers and Panzer IV. Fog blanketed the fields around Arracourt. On paper, the Americans were outmatched. Their 75mm guns struggled against Panther armour, and they fielded fewer tanks overall. Yet Clark's Shermans moved like dancers in the mist. Platoons shifted, feinted, and struck flanks with precision. Reports show that 75 Shermans destroyed 86 German tanks in less than 10 days. Clark later said, "We outmaneuvered them because we could talk." German prisoners described bewilderment. It seemed you had double the tanks. In truth, they had radios. German commanders expected clumsy, isolated opponents. Instead, they faced units that behaved as a single organism, each part reacting to signals the Germans could neither see nor stop. Arracourt proved that communication could defeat superior firepower, a lesson that haunted German survivors long after. For the men inside the steel boxes, radios were more than tools. Private First Class Leo Kaplan, a gunner in Patton's Third Army, remembered hearing other voices in combat. "It felt like we weren't alone. Someone was always with us, even when shells hit radios, turned isolation into solidarity." Crews joked, argued, or encouraged each other between bursts of battle chatter. In contrast, German memoirs describe confusion and isolation, tankers yelling through open hatches under fire, commanders waving arms in vain. That difference shaped morale as deeply as tactics. To Americans, coordination bred confidence. To Germans, silence often meant panic. Yet Kaplan admitted that radios didn't erase the dread. Hearing another crew scream under fire was worse than silence. Radios gave connection, but they also made the horrors of battle unescapable. By late 1944, German officers began acknowledging the gap. A Panzer Lehr Division report noted, "Enemy use of radios outpaces our tactical responses." The Wehrmacht tried to expand installations, but Allied bombing had crippled electronics production. Factories like Lorenz in Berlin and Telefunken in Hanover could no longer meet demand. Spare parts were scarce. Even when radios were issued, breakdowns left many tanks mute. Training was another hurdle. German crews drilled on marksmanship and gunnery, but not on fluid radio tactics. By the time they adapted, the war was already lost. The imbalance was no longer Panther versus Sherman, but silence versus information. One German officer later reflected bitterly, "We built the best tanks, but not the best armies." And with every silent Panther knocked out, the lesson grew clearer. Behind the front lines, radios had their own supply war. The US Signal Corps shipped over 350,000 sets to Europe by 1944, packed in waterproof crates. Each shipment included spare tubes, antennas, and field manuals. Maintenance crews kept tanks on net by cannibalizing parts from wrecked Shermans or swapping tubes under fire. Redundancy was everywhere, abundance that Germans couldn't match. US field records show that even after heavy losses, units could replace sets within hours. In comparison, German tank crews sometimes fought entire engagements without radios due to shortages. This abundance gave American armour continuity. Voices rarely went silent, but it also encouraged risk-taking. Commanders sometimes pushed Shermans into duels they couldn't win in armour terms, assuming manoeuvre and coordination would carry the day. Sometimes it did, and sometimes it cost lives. By 1945, more than 49,000 Shermans had been produced, nearly all radio-equipped. Analysts later called this the hidden weapon of US armour. The myth of Sherman inferiority, mocked for thin armour and weak guns, ignored the truth that radios gave them an edge far beyond steel. Survivors on both sides reflected on the difference. German officers admitted being stunned by the speed and coordination of American tanks. Historian Stephen Zaloga summarized, "Where Germans built better tanks, Americans built better armies." Radios symbolized that distinction. They represented an industrial system that valued communication, logistics, and scale over sheer machine perfection. The strategic legacy was clear. Modern warfare would belong to those who could speak, hear, and act faster than the enemy. After the war, armies worldwide standardized radios across their forces, a direct legacy of the Sherman experience. And though the last Sherman rolled off the line decades ago, its invisible advantage, the voice in the fog, remains the defining lesson.